You got it. Nice.
We figured it out. All right. Well, hey, everyone. Thanks for coming for today's workshop that Kerry and I are hosting. We're super excited. So we're going to get smarter on APIs and SDKs with some hands-on practice and some real-world examples. So Kerry is really the mastermind, and she'll tell you all about her work and what she does with PhenoML, which is just a really fun company name to say. For those who have not met me yet, I'm Paulius. I'm a family medicine physician. I've been in health tech for a little while now, and I'm building my own company with XPC. So happy to connect with you all later. In the meantime, some of the just house rules. Feel free to use the chat extensively, and we can call on people if they have questions, and we'll move things along that way. Or if you want to speak, raise your hand. And Kerry, why don't I hand it off to you and tell us a bit about yourself so people get to know you, and then you can jump into the PowerPoint.
Awesome. Yeah, nice to meet everybody. I'm the founder and CEO of PhenoML. We make APIs that make it easy to use language and LLMs with healthcare data, specifically FHIR APIs. So I'm really excited to talk today about APIs versus SDKs. I've been chatting with Paulius. I met Paulius actually in January in San Francisco at a Medplum event at JPM. I have a personal passion behind empowering healthcare folks with a variety of backgrounds to better leverage technology. I believe strongly that, especially with AI, there's a lot more that folks that don't come from a traditional software engineering background can do to make the solutions they're looking for. And I love demystifying technology. So yeah, really excited to partner with Paulius on this, and going to give you an overview of APIs versus SDKs. We're going to do an interactive session. Yeah, a quick note. So I know there's a really big range of folks with different backgrounds on this call. We've got providers, we've got developers, we've got people from Canvas and Medplum coming here. So some of the content I'm going to talk through is going to be pretty familiar if you're already comfortable, if you're already a developer, but it's intended to essentially support like a wide range of audience, which is all the folks that are on this call today. Awesome. So just to kind of go over what are we going to cover today. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over some core concepts. As I mentioned, if you're already a developer, this is going to be kind of like obvious for you, but if you're not, really intending to kind of demystify this for folks. What I also found interesting is as folks have signed up for this workshop, there's a lot of like, I know what an API is, but I don't understand what an SDK is. So really excited to hopefully demystify that for a bunch of folks. Then I'm going to demonstrate making API calls to 3 different EHRs. I apologize for the folks that tried to, that signed up to get their own app. Turns out there is a limit on how many replicant collaborators you can have. And apparently I blew through that limit. So what I'm going to do after this session is I'm going to share a link to a completely open app so you can take it. It's not on the replets limit. So hopefully you can follow along. And then I'm going to, as part of the session, so we're going to make API calls to Canvas Medical, Cerner, and Medplum FHIR APIs. I'm also going to show how our LangTo FHIR API from my company, PhenoML, can be used to make language into those FHIR API calls. And then the last component, we're going to customize the Canvas Medical UI using Canvas's SDK. And I'm going to show you how I built an AI native charting application using Medplum's SDK. Excellent. So what's an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface. I really like this analogy from Postman. Essentially, it covers this concept of an API serving as a standard protocol between a client, a requester, or a creator of information and an API server. So let's just talk about it in like a restaurant setting. So in a restaurant, we have a kitchen, we have a chef, we have folks that are making food. You're the diner, you're getting different meals, there's a menu available that are the different kinds of foods that you can order from, but you need to be able to order from an actual waiter. So in the API world, the API functions effectively as that waiter, except that you can both tell the waiter, the API, hey, I want a salad. The waiter will go then to the kitchen and go get the salad for you. But you can also, in an API, give information to the API server. So that would be like, let's say you make your own herbs and you're like, hey, I have some oregano. I think you guys would really like it. Here, I'm going to give you herbs to the waiter, and then that waiter will take the herbs and make it available in that kitchen. So effectively, APIs function to provide a standardized interface between clients, applications, Python scripts, and so forth, and an API server, which is all the magic behind different software applications. So from a more practical like UI perspective, what does that look like? So on the left-hand side, this is a screenshot of the Canvas Medical EHR. So if you've ever created patients in an EHR, this will look familiar to you. But essentially, when you go to put in that information on a patient, first name, last name, date of birth, that actually is corresponding to an API call in that EHR's API. And so when you then go to make a request, you're actually sending that information to that API. So we're going to actually do this example I'm showing you right here in a moment interactively, but just kind of want to like mentally connect the two dots. That when we're creating information within an application, that's actually translating to an API call under the hood. And I know I'm like kind of speeding through a couple things, but I think it'll get a little bit more clear once I show like more hands-on examples. And then on the left-hand side, we have Medplum charting application, and you can see we're creating a condition. So like, let's say a patient has a problem that they've reported and you want to store that information in the EHR. The different information that you would have in your application, that's actually converting under the hood to an API call that's creating that condition within Medplum's EHR in this case. All right, like, how am I doing on time? Okay, so, and then the last component to talk about, which is, I think, like a big area that is new for folks is, well, okay, well, then what's an SDK? I'm going to briefly show this, and then I'm going to come back to it after we make the API calls to kind of like coalesce the concept. But basically, if I go back to this example here, where under the hood, when I create a condition for a patient, I have to write a bunch of code. What if I didn't want to write all that code every single time for a bunch of repeatable use cases? Like if I'm the EHR vendor, if I'm Canvas Medical, or if I'm Medplum, or I'm Stripe for that matter in a payment system, I actually want developers that are building stuff with my systems to not have to write a bunch of code, because it means they're going to use my stuff more and I'm making their life easier. And as a developer, if somebody already has an SDK, I'm like, awesome. I don't have to write a bunch of code. I can just use a one-liner to get going. And so the really quick way to think about an SDK versus an API is that SDKs are essentially like a one-liner or a much more abbreviated version of a bunch of API calls that serve to make it easier for developers to build stuff. I don't know, Paulius, if you wanted to chat like the medical kind of analogy that we talked through.
Yeah, I think you did a totally a good job with the, for people who are more familiar with the clinical world, I think you can think of SDKs as an order set almost, and they're usually set by the system level, and so you don't get to modify it. Obviously, some EMRs have those capabilities where everyone can modify any order sets, but that's one way of thinking of sending an individual order, whether it be a lab or a prescription, versus admission order set that just includes all monitoring vitals and getting these labs every 4 hours or whatnot. So that's, I think, another concept that can help people appreciate that.
And then I'll kind of go into these two more like detailed architectural slides. And then I think I'll come back to it after we go through the API calls to kind of like bring it all together. But there's two different kind of ways to think about how SDKs are used. The first is, so as I said before, an SDK is essentially like to Paulius's point, it's a repeatable use case. So it's like a one-liner of code that you can use instead of having to, as a developer, write a bunch of lines of code. So it's like a shortcut, essentially. And if I'm making a new app, like let's say I'm making a telemedicine app, I'm going to use my EHR's SDK if they have it available. And I could use that to be able to create patients, to create conditions. Maybe I want to have a telemedicine component, so I'm going to use the Zoom SDK, and I want to be able to launch, calls with patients. Maybe I want to be able to enable patients to direct pay. Maybe I'm going like more of a D2C approach for my solution. I want to use the Stripe SDK. And so often what happens as a developer is we'll be using these different SDKs to essentially build our app faster. So think of it as like off-the-shelf parts when you're making if you're making a mechanical solution, but just a way to accelerate your development time. And those SDKs can then be used to interface with your given EHR. There's another framework that's a little bit different. which is the paradigm you're going to see when I show you how Canvas's SDK works, which is where the SDK is actually used to configure the EHR. So the two, like to kind of convey the difference, in this case, where we're building an app, like we're building a telemedicine app for patients. Maybe it's a web app, maybe it's a mobile app. We want them to be able to have an appointment. We want them to be able to pay for their appointment. Me as the developer, I'm owning that end patient experience. I'm owning that provider experience. That's my app. And I'm using these EHR APIs, or I'm using Zoom's APIs as a kind of in a headless manner. Like I'm controlling the end user experience. And so in this case, like I'm using those SDKs as a way to accelerate my build of my own telehealth solution. In this example, and in the example I'm going to showcase for Canvas, and many other customizable EHRs that function in a headless manner, their EHR is the user-facing application, and the SDK is used to customize how that shows up. So it's slightly different. I think the contrast is if you want to build from your own custom solution with complete control of the end user experience, these are examples where the SDK is something that you're using as part of your development. In this solution, you're actually using the SDK to configure your EHR. And I'll make that much more clear when I show like making a change using Canvas's SDK. But I think that the takeaway on APIs versus SDKs is, okay, like if you remember nothing else from this workshop, SDKs make it easier for you to make a bunch of API calls so that you as a developer don't have to write as much code. Make your life easier. The second thing to learn from APIs versus SDKs is that how they work from an EHR perspective, it depends on what that company is the preferred pattern. Do they want to enable developers to build their own custom solutions, or do they want to enable customization within their existing framework? So that's kind of like a shorthand way to think about it. And then I hope there's no one from Epic or Cerner on the call. But like the more legacy EHRs in the past really didn't want you to be customizing stuff, and they wanted a lot of control. Obviously, there's been a lot of evolution over the past number of years. And in those cases, you will rarely see an SDK for those kinds of EHRs. So that's sort of like the way to think about it. I told Paulius, I said like the technical solutions that developers and companies make available informs their strategic positioning and how they want people to use it. Okay, cool. So I went through a bunch of stuff. Now we're going to actually, oh yeah, what's up?
Kerry, just to interject a bit, I was saying, we do have people from Canvas and Medplum, and like Andrew from Canvas just chimed in with some things. We can loop back for some Q&A to make things, more in the weeds, because there's always nuances with things. So I appreciate y'all chiming in over chat, and we can certainly circle back on that. Because, right, we're not going to, I think, cover every possible permutation or functionality, and there's always an asterisk somewhere.
Yes, thank you. And also, thank you so much to the Canvas and Medplum folks for joining. I really appreciate it. Okay, so we are going to, first, I'm going to show you Canvas's UI. We're going to understand how patients show up in Canvas's UI, and then we're going to actually use Canvas's API to create a patient in our Canvas Medical EHR. Okay, so this is the Canvas Medical EHR UI. This is the sandbox that I have available. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a patient. So is there any like fictional character or celebrity name that you guys would like to create a patient of? Put it in the chat. No one. Well, I mean, I can.
Okay, there we go. We got.
I can come up with characters all day long. Okay, Frodo. Okay, so Frodo Baggins. He's a. We'll do. Franco Sessieta.
Oh, I think they're playing. I think it's the Heartbeat. One of the companies that showed up. Yeah, exactly. I caught Andrew. Okay,
I'm going to create Frodo Baggins. So let's see. Like, I don't have Frodo is not part of our system. We have not admitted him as a patient. So we're going to add Frodo Baggins to our Canvas EHR. How old do we think Frodo is? He's young, right? I'm going to stick with 23. I think he's a young patient. So what I'm doing right here is, okay, so we have Frodo, first name, last name, Baggins, and then we're going to be running this create patient script, which essentially creates that patient. I showed you that code earlier where we're creating all of this information. We're putting it in Fire resource, and then we're going to do, this is the money line right here. We're going to make an API call to Canvas to create our patient within our EHR. So now what we're going to do is, and if you, we're going to do this. Okay, so fun fact for those of you that are new to APIs, status code 201 means we created the patient successfully. So now we're going to go to our Canvas EHR and we're going to look up Frodo. And here we go. Here's Frodo. So we're, this will become relevant in our next step when we come back to Canvas to create a condition for Frodo. But yeah, we just created a patient. Cool. So now we're going to do the same thing. Well, actually, we're going to do something a little different. So I would be remiss to not show you more like traditional EHR Cerner. For this Cerner example, I'm not going to create any patients or conditions. We're going to search the Cerner sandbox and get a list of patients. Cerner has an unauthenticated API that you could, a sandbox that you can use to retrieve information. So if you're interested in learning more about like Cerner's Fire APIs, they actually have pretty decent documentation and open sandboxes. So for our Cerner example, we're going to search the Cerner sandbox for all the patients that are 30 years old. So that's what's happening here is we're running this search patients. And it's actually this is the Cerner Fire endpoint for the Cerner sandbox. And we're basically making a request. This is the API call line where we're saying, let's get the patients that meet this criteria. Okay, so now we're going to do this. We're requesting from Cerner. And then we see we found 10 patients that met our criteria. Okay, great. I show this. I did a dry run with my mom earlier this week. She's a clinical professor at NYU, and she was like, "Why isn't there more patients?" And I was like, "No, it's a sandbox. Like you shouldn't expect there to be a bunch of patients." But it's cool to explore. Like you can do different kind of requests from the Cerner sandbox to get like appointments and so forth. Okay, great. So now we're going to create a condition in Medplum. Okay, so I'm just going to go over to Medplum and I'll show you the patient that we're going to create a condition for. By the way, I am kind of loosely watching the chat, but I will be responding when we're at a point where I can respond. So I will try to respond to questions as I go through, but I might not see all of them. Okay. So we are now going to create a condition for Walker, Texas Ranger, one of our patients in our Medplum EHR. And so I just wanted to show you, like, here's Walker. You can see there's no conditions that have been reported for this patient. So we're actually going to create a condition for Walker via the Medplum's Fire API. So we're going to go here. So this is my Walker, Texas Ranger. This is his patient ID. And we're going to create an asthma condition for Walker. And so what's happening within this script here is we are creating a condition that's a Fire condition resource. And then this is the money line here. We're sending the condition information for that patient for Walker to create it. So now I'm going to do this. Okay. Oh, I didn't authenticate myself. Hold on. Sorry, guys. I guess I expired. Okay, hide your eyes of me doing some stuff.
Yeah, that sounds good. And in the meantime, I can just say that there's some people asking really good questions. And I would say if you still have that question by the end of our examples and demos, that's when we can circle back to it. Just because once we walk through the SDK examples, it might click for you more. And that's really the whole purpose of why we wanted to show what the code looks like, what the UI outcome looks like. And then we can dig into the details of still any points of confusions. And then obviously the best way to understand it is just to do it. And so some people have asked, are these APIs freely available? And one thing, I guess we just made some assumptions, but yes, like if you go to the different websites and search for whatever product API, in the Canvas case and Medplum, the API docs are open and accessible to everyone, and then you can create a sandbox account and then try things out for yourself.
Thanks, Paulius. Yeah, Jonathan, I can come back to that when we get to the SDK component. It might make a little bit more sense. Okay, so while I was like copying the bearer token, which I hope nobody saw all the details there, I just made an API call to Medplum to create a condition for Walker, Texas Ranger. And so when I refresh here, we're going to see now that we created our condition, which is that Walker has asthma. So now we've created a patient just to like recap, we've created a patient in Canvas, we've created a condition for a patient in Medplum, we made a search to Cerner, and we're doing awesome on time, Paulius. That's like exactly where we should be at.
Yep.
So the next part I'm going to show you is showing our phenomenal lengthifier API. So we take unstructured text, documents, images, and convert them to Fire creating resources as well as Fire searches. And I'm going to show you how we're going to create, using language, a condition for Walker, and we're going to create a condition for Frodo in our Canvas EHR. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go here. Okay, so this is Walker, and then let me get Frodo's patient identifier so that we make sure we're creating this for Frodo. Okay, so we're going to, so this is this main.py file, and again, I'm going to share this workshop app as a public app so that you can take a look. You'll just need your own credentials to actually run stuff. But because of the Replit limitation on collaborators, unfortunately, I wasn't able to share with everybody, but I'll share it after the workshop. Okay, so I'll show you what's happening under the hood, but essentially what we're going to do is we're going to describe in language a condition that this patient has, and then we're going to create a condition for our Walker, Texas Ranger in Medplum, and we're going to create a condition for Frodo in Canvas. And so what's happening in this create condition file is we are taking our text that we described, like patient has generalized anxiety disorder. We're going to make an API call to my company's API, lengthifier, that takes text and returns back a Fire resource. So if you saw here, when we were creating the condition, there's like a bunch of code that we wrote or a bunch of information we wrote to structure that condition resource. Our phenomenal lengthifier API uses LLMs to extract information and be able to generate that resource for you. So obviously I'm very biased. I think it's really cool because you can create different Fire API calls and create information in EHRs and retrieve information from EHRs all using language. And so what's happening here is we're making a call to Phenomenal's lengthifier API using language to create a condition, and then we're assigning it to our patient, which if it's in Canvas, we're going to create it for our Canvas patient. If it's in Medplum, we're going to create it for our Medplum patient, and then we're going to make a subsequent call to Canvas or Medplum's API. Like just a big sort of promo for HL7 Fire. This is kind of the beauty of Fire APIs is like, I literally didn't have to make any changes to my code. I can take language into a Fire output, and because both Canvas and Medplum support Fire, it's the same API call, which I think is really awesome. Okay, great. So now we're going to do what I just described. So hopefully I didn't mess up my own authentication for my own API. Before I do, is there any other condition you would prefer I have these patients get? Or are you fine with generalized anxiety disorder?
We should get some volunteers.
Yeah, tell me, what is a condition you would like? We can create multiple conditions, by the way. Just going to make sure I don't need to re-authenticate to my own stuff. Okay, cool. I don't. Nice. Insert your favorite condition. Okay.
Okay, nice. We got some hard things happening. So
okay, cool. Let's do heart arrhythmia. Patient has. Oh, nice. Replit will autocomplete. Okay, so before I do that, let's see that for Frodo, we have our anxiety disorder created in Canvas. And we just did that from the API call we made. And then let's take a look at Walker. And Walker also has anxiety disorder. Awesome. So, and you'll notice just quick plug, that's using the actual ICD code. So our APIs for Lengthfire uses standard terminology systems, ICD, RxNorm, Loink, and so forth. Okay, so now we're going to do heart arrhythmia. We have these patients, they're having a rough visit. Okay, so we got cardiac arrhythmia created for Frodo, and we have cardiac arrhythmia created for Walker. Awesome. Cool.
And Kerry, I mean, the stitching this together saves a ton of time. And so I guess, can you walk through what the alternative would be if they did not use what you've created?
As a developer, you would be you'd have a drop down list for your end user, your provider, to select the different diagnosis code. You need to enter in a bunch of information. Obviously, there's ways to make that faster. I know for Canvas, it auto completes. Medplum has Medplum's SDK that makes it easier for developers to build that. Obviously, in Cerner or Epic, they have a lot of that kind of templated. But as we're seeing more and more providers that want to be able to use AI as part of the entire experience, I think there's a lot of opportunity to enable, I call it if you've used Cursor as a development environment, I call it cursorifying the provider experience. So I think it's a lot of opportunity to, if you think of the EHR is where you go to do work as a provider, obviously not, in terms of treating a patient, but it's where you go to enter information and retrieve information as a provider. In the developer space, our coding environment is where we go to do work. And so in programming, we're getting a lot of tools that make that super easy. I'm a big believer that we can do so much more for providers and offer that kind of functionality. Okay, so we just made a bunch of API calls. Now, I think it'd be good to take a pause if there's any sort of API specific questions. And then we can go on to the SDK demos. Feel free to put them in the chat. Were there any API questions, Paulius, I missed?
I think everyone's more or less up to speed. I think when we were getting into SDKs is when people really...
Okay, cool. So yeah. So why don't we jump into SDKs, and then that's probably where we're going to get a bunch of questions.
And actually, Kerry, Bjorn has a question about Replit. I guess that's one other tool that may not be familiar to...
Yeah. So full disclosure, Paulius introduced me to Replit. I think Replit is really cool because it is a browser-based contained environment to do programming. So as an alternative, what you often use as a developer is a desktop application like VS Code, if you've heard of that, or Cursor. If you're like a Pythonista, you were probably using a Jupyter Lab notebook on your local computer. If you have to deal with Windows and you're programming, I am so sorry for you. I have lived that life in the past. I understand how difficult it is. And that's actually why like browser-based development environments are really nice. So Replit is pretty nice for that because then you don't have to deal with figuring out, you can like use the actual Linux commands you find on Stack Overflow or from like ChatGPT, and you're not having to convert it to like Windows land. I don't know. I'm guessing there's a bunch of people that have to use Windows at their work on this call. And so I'm just like, I empathize with you. No hate to the Microsoft Windows people that might be on the call. So the nice thing about Replit is like this whole app that I made here, like I'm running this within Replit's cloud environment. So I can, I can run this. I don't have to worry about like a bunch of dependencies on my computer. Replit, like autocomplete stuff, as Thiv is saying, is like it's like nice to vibe code with. I don't believe Replit signs BAAs. So don't put PHI in Replit. I believe they do have a SOC. They have a SOC 2 attestation. I don't know about any other security or data privacy stuff, but just like everybody here is in healthcare. Like, make sure you have a BAA signed with the company you're working with before you put PHI in it. Obviously, these are all fake patients, unless Proto, like the Hobbit Town actually exists in New Zealand or something. So Replit I think is really nice for like doing collaborative coding. It's kind of like Google Docs for programming. I mean, if I didn't get kicked off the Replit number of collaborators, you would get to see that fully. But it's pretty nice. And then you can also take let's say you find a repo on GitHub you think is really cool and you want to just be able to run it in Replit. When you create a Replit app, you can actually use a GitHub repo as a way to get started. And that's what I actually did for the Medplum provider, AI-powered Medplum provider app that I built, which I'm going to show you in a moment. All right. I think we're gonna do some SDKs.
Yeah, let's keep rolling. I think that's
okay. So now we're going to, let's see, let me just make sure this is like my Canvas people are going to laugh at me. This is like my way of checking stuff in Canvas. Okay, so what we're going to use the Canvas SDK for, we're going to actually change up what's on the sidebar here. So you see how on this charting app, we have conditions is the bottom, this widget that's down here. Let's say we wanted conditions to be the top like widget. I don't know what Canvas you call this, but I call these widgets. Let's say we want to have conditions be at the top here instead of allergies. So we're going to actually make that change using the Canvas SDK. So Canvas has this approach called plugins. And essentially what you can use the Canvas SDK for is you can create your own Canvas plugin, which customizes your Canvas implementation. And so what we're going to do right now is like if you see the layout for patient chart summary, it's using the Canvas SDK. We're going to change up this section where conditions is, and we're going to add it at the top here. So instead of it being here, we're going to make it here. And then we're going to do Canvas install. Also, props to the Canvas folks. I just came up to speed on Canvas plugins like this past week and a half, and it was really easy to come up to speed on. So thank you. Okay, so we just installed our plugin, and we can go back to our Canvas app or EHR, and you can see conditions is at the top. And so this is like really helpful to be able to make different customizations. I'm not going to do the Canvas folks full, I'll defer to the Canvas folks, but I would definitely take a look at their documentation of the different customizations that you can do to make things like look differently. Kind of to go back to Jonathan, your question around like SDK versus an API. To do what I just did via API, I think it would require a pretty non-trivial number of API calls to be able to update the layout. And to make that easier for people that use Canvas, and obviously, Andrew, you can chime in if you feel differently, but they make an SDK so that it literally is just like layout equals this, and I just change up where I want to put conditions in my chart. So the alternative would be that you would have to like retrieve what's the current layout from Canvas, get it back via API call, make another API call to change like where is conditions located. Instead, they make it very simple to be able to change it up here and then create a plugin that we install.
And Kerry, I would just also add that we did have quite a simple example here, but the cool part for all developers, I think, on any EMR that they use is the ability to create modals, whether they take up the entire screen or do like a side panel slide out, because that's the least invasive way to get into the workflow for clinicians. And, like, a lot of people just have a ton of tabs open because they're toggling between different resources and whatnot. And so I think as developers build products for us to use with patients, thinking of executing them through modals is a really good way to approach that. And in Canvas documentation, it's really easy to create different side panels or full screen modals. So that's probably like a superpower that not everyone realizes until they start building with it. And if you have any questions about that, let me know. I'm happy to answer them and show how I use them in my development.
Awesome. Thanks, Paulius. Okay. We're doing actually like really well on time. So nice. So I think I'll go on to my Medplum example. To be very candid and open, I work with Medplum. I've been spending a ton of time using Medplum's SDK for a number of months now. I'm a huge fan of Medplum, and I'm excited to show you an app that I built that's completely AI powered using Medplum's SDK and Medplum's APIs. And actually, this is a completely public Replit. So I'll actually send you guys the link to this if you did want to take a look. And I also send you the GitHub repo if you wanted to look like that. Look at that. Okay. I'll just do that real quick. So when I put this in Replit, I actually just pulled it from my GitHub repo. Okay, so let's see. Where do I want to start with this for Medplum's SDK? Okay, so Medplum has a TypeScript SDK that you can use to build a completely, like if I go back to this diagram that I was showing earlier, where I'm actually using Medplum's SDK to build my own provider application. And so what I'm going to show you is basically like, how did I do that? So the app that I put in the links is I have Medplum's SDK, and I created a custom AI-powered entry point for providers to be able to create prescriptions, create conditions, get information about patient cohorts, like a bunch of stuff, all using language, using our Lengthifier API. And so this is sort of like how I architected this application. The GitHub repo is completely open, so you can take a look and see everything I did. And I'm going to also show you what I did on Replit. Also, by the way, we have customers that are forking that repo and building their applications off of that. And so, take a look and let me know if you have any questions. But I'm going to show you like in more granular detail how I used Medplum's SDK to actually build this application. Okay, so within the standard Medplum provider application, we have the ability to create different information like a condition. We can create new prescriptions for patients. And what I want to do is, I'll just show you briefly, like I configured with my app, using Medplum's SDK to be able to create different kinds of information using natural language. And I even went a step further and added scribe functionality into it using a browser-based scribes for like completely private LLM usage. Let's say I wanted to take what I built and apply it to the condition, creating a condition so that we can create a condition for a patient using language within the chart itself. Okay, so we're going to go here. So in using Medplum's SDK, they have in the provider application, the default one, they have a resource create page. And what I did was I essentially created a version of that was completely AI powered. And so when we want a certain resource, like a certain type of information in our Fire server and our like EHR to support different information, I can update this list. And this like I created to be able to decide whether I'm going to show the AI version of the creating information or I want to show the standard version. So I'm going to update this. And what happens is when I go to, so it's going to say, when I click on this button, I'll show you what the button looks like, this like pretty Create with Natural Language button. It's going to actually send me to the Lengthifier version, which is where I enter it with language. And so Medplum's SDK makes it very, very easy for you to create different like Fire resources. So creating a condition, creating a patient, creating an observation, gathering information. And what I did is I essentially took that and I AI-ified it. I made it so that you could describe it in language. I made it so that when you click create condition, it's going to make a call via to my API and get the response back, and used Medplum's SDK to do that. So for Walker, we're going to create a condition for him. Let's see, what do I want to give him? I'll give him hyperlipidemia. Or wait, let me think of another condition. We will give him, let me think, what's a good, well, I don't know. Can you suggest a condition in the chat?
Yeah, you should just go with hyperlipidemia.
Okay, or I'll do that. Okay, so patient.
Oh yeah, and someone said CKD stage 3. You can try that too.
Okay, I could do that with chronic disease. Okay, so we're making an API call to my Lengthifier API, and we're creating a condition resource, chronic kidney disease, with it. And so like I also using Medplum's SDK, I can also like reuse a bunch of the functionality that they already made available to be able to like enable the end user to like make updates here. They can edit it or make any changes. So what would I have had to do if I didn't have Medplum's SDK? If I didn't have that SDK, well, first of all, I wouldn't have this whole application to build off of to customize. It would have taken me a lot more time. I would have had to figure out all of the different API calls to make. I would have had to figure out a bunch of the different ways to handle Fire information in my front end. It would have just taken me a lot more time. And so SDKs are really nice to not have to worry about that stuff. The one area I will say SDKs are like a huge like lifesaver for me as a startup founder is Stripe's SDK. I'm like a huge Stripe SDK fangirl because the alternative, if I didn't have Stripe's SDK and I wanted people to be able to put in their credit card and set up for and stuff, I'd have to build it all from scratch with their APIs. It's a lot of work. And I really like that I can just like use something off the shelf that's already available. If that's the thing that you learn about, if you're new to like the developer community, if you're a provider and you're new to programming, the one thing I would take away is developers like to just reuse what's available as much as possible because it's already tried and true, it's already battle tested, and we just honestly want to make stuff fast. And so SDKs make it easier for you to be able to do that. And so like, yeah, go ahead.
Quick question around that. I'm just curious whether, so are there like indie or hacker communities where maybe some companies don't put out their SDKs, but someone else will build one in a sense? And, you know, is like, are there examples where this happens or?
Oh, that's interesting. I think like that can happen. I wouldn't say people would release like an their own SDK for an API. If there wasn't one that already existed, they might make their own like SDK or package that they prefer. Like, actually, no. Okay, I have an example. I have a good example. Clinicaltrials.gov API does not have an SDK. I have no idea why not, but the government hasn't made one available. There's a couple Python packages that are available. So to take a step back, if you've ever gone to clinicaltrials.gov and looked up for clinical trials, there's actually a really well-documented, fantastic API for clinicaltrials.gov. If you want to be able to get information for different like trials that are available for patients. But ct.gov doesn't make an SDK available. That would be awesome. Actually, I'm like semi-motivated to make one. There's like an ancient Python package that's out of date. But that's an example where like, if you're making a bunch of calls to the clinicaltrials.gov API, as a developer, like if the government hasn't made an SDK for that, you might as well just make one. So like, yeah, that's like an area of Paulius where like, I think that the sort of general developer community would probably just like go forward. And I think in the Python world, that often happens a lot. So folks will just build their own Python packages to make that easier.
Nice.
Actually, if somebody knows if there is a ct.gov SDK, please tell me because I would like to use it. Otherwise, like I actually don't think it exists. Awesome. The other thing to tell you that just to kind of go back to this architecture. So another SDK that I used as part of my app is from Hugging Face. So Hugging Face hosts a bunch of different open source models for different like LLMs. And I'm using their SDK called transformers.js, where you can actually run an LLM in the browser. I think this is really cool. And so I'm using Hugging Face's Transformers SDK to power this. I'll show you. So this little icon here, this uses your microphone on your local device and it converts it to text using an LLM running in the browser. So it's using the OpenAI Open Whisper model running in the browser. It's not as good as other scribes, but I wanted to make, for this demo app, I wanted it to be something that was completely like HIPAA compliant and running in the browser and totally private. Particularly like I have worked with a bunch of like mental health providers and know a lot of those folks, and like that level of data privacy is really important. And I also know I would assume from a provider perspective, having that ownership on like this transcription and where it's being stored and being able to make sure you're comfortable with it before you submit, I thought were like kind of cool things to highlight. And so that's why in my custom application I made using Medplum's SDK, I added in Hugging Face's Transformers SDK so that it could run that transcription in the browser. Cool.
I think we're back to CKD3, right?
I made that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm on my phone because of the Wi-Fi outage, so I can't read all the tiny text. But yes, good.
Awesome. So I know we went I guess I went a lot faster than I fully intended. But I'm happy to answer any additional questions. We have a question one. So okay, good. This is a good question from Philip. So for Hugging Face's Transformers.js, it's actually loading the model into your browser.
And
so there's
Kerry, second before, because not everyone read the question, so just
sure.
Philip, you can either ask the question or Kerry, you can read it.
Yeah, so I'll call it out. So Philip's asking in the chat, the Hugging Face Transformers SDK, is it making an external API call and therefore the patient information is being sent to Hugging Face? The cool part about this, the Hugging Face Transformers SDK, is that it loads the model into your browser. So it's actually using your device to run the model. So there's no external API calls happening. Obviously, this won't work for everything. And there's some limitations in terms of like people's computers and how well they can process and run a model on the device. So it can only support like pretty tiny models because those are the only ones that like your computer could run it on your browser. But as we get better and better LLMs that can be compressed, I'm excited about the potential of running LLMs in the browser because of the privacy implications.
Yeah, definitely a good question. And, I think this is probably a good stopping point for us. At least we'll pause the recording and then some people can hang out. But just a huge shout out to Kerry and Canvas and Medplum to just, being available to hang out. And we really appreciate you guys. Well, we can keep the conversation going afterwards. And if we're exploring whether it makes sense to dig into some other topics like MCPs and other things that are getting quite interesting these days. So would love some feedback. And I'll stop the recording, but y'all feel free to hang out here if you'd like.
Yeah, and like I really appreciate you guys